Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Butterfly Highways, Local Leaders Taking Flight. With the recent proposed listing of the monarch butterfly under the Endangered Species Act and the decline of other pollinator and wildlife species, municipalities and community-based organizations must come to play a role in creating habitat where people live, work, learn, play, and worship. We thank you for joining this webinar to learn about roadside habitat projects from cities participating in the National Wildlife Federation's Mayor's Monarch Pledge program. Before we get started, just wanted to provide one Zoom reminder. We ask that you all, if you have questions, to please put them in the Q&A box. They will all be addressed at the end of the presentation after all the presenters have gone. And if we're unable to get to all of the questions, we'll absolutely do our best to respond to them by email. This is our agenda for today, and I want to start, before we get into that, with a thank you. We're hosting this webinar thanks to the financial support of the New York Community Trust, who is also supporting our National Roadside Habitat Project. So thank you to the New York Community Trust. Today, we're going to be doing a quick introduction to monarch butterfly decline and roadside habitat. And I do say quick because we assume you're here today because you know a bit about the monarch butterfly and you're interested in learning more about roadside habitat. So we'll cover that quickly, and then we'll move to the presentations from Mayor's Monarch Pledge cities on local roadside habitat projects. We'll have our Q&A session and then some brief closing remarks. So at the National Wildlife Federation, it's our mission to unite all Americans to ensure that wildlife thrives in a rapidly changing world. And our world is absolutely changing rapidly. Wildlife and people are suffering parallel and connected crises. And fortunately, these crises range from the climate crisis to the biodiversity crisis, and wildlife and pollinators and the monarch butterflies really need our help. So that is why we're here today. And we are going to focus on monarch butterfly and pollinator conservation today. I'm including pollinators because every time we're creating habitat and doing work for the monarch butterfly, we want to make sure that pollinators are also included as well. So a little bit about the monarch butterfly decline. Both the western and eastern monarch populations have experienced significant declines in recent years. Most recently, according to the Xerces Society, the 28th annual Western monarch count has reported a peak population of just 9,119 overwintering butterflies this winter in the western population. And this is unfortunately the second lowest overwintering population that's ever been recorded since tracking began in 1997. And again, it coincides with monarch butterflies being proposed for protection under the U.S. Endangered Species Act. We expect that the eastern population numbers will be released in the coming weeks. But in recent years, we know that populations in the east and west have experienced significant declines. And this chart is from the western population. It doesn't include 2024. If it did, it would be a very small sliver off to the right-hand side. But sadly, the trend again is down. And throughout the Central Monarch Flyway and the Western Migratory Corridors, many people and even whole communities are working to create pockets of monarch butterfly habitat in urban and suburban and even rural areas, including on agricultural lands, grazing land trust sites, parks, natural areas, schools, municipal buildings, lots of different places. And there's a significant opportunity to extend the ecological benefit of these areas by converting roadsides into ecological corridors. Connecting fragments of native habitat increases the quality of stopover habitats for monarchs along their migratory pathway. And during stops in migration, monarchs need easy access to nectar resources, to refuel, host plants to reproduce, and shelter for rest and protection. Habitat loss and fragmentation force monarchs to travel longer distances, and they deplete fat reserves as they search for suitable stopover habitats. And the loss of natural habitats decreases the monarch's population's health, reproduction, and survival. And it's therefore the establishment of vegetated areas along roadsides serve as ecological corridors. This will restore connectivity between natural habitats and will conserve monarchs and other wildlife species. The last thing I just want to say is studies have shown that well-managed, high-quality roadside habitat vegetation actually increased butterfly species richness and reduced the incidence of road crossings to seek resources of nectar, thus lowering road mortality. And we do sometimes get questions about that. On our next slide, I just want to lift up one resource for you all before we transition to our local leaders' presentations. About 3 years ago, the National Wildlife Federation's Mayor's Monarch Pledge program came together with the Texas Department of Transportation FAR District in the lower Rio Grande Valley of Texas and Merrimack Spring Park in Missouri to support the expansion of roadside habitat for monarchs and other pollinators. These projects are documented in our roadside habitat guide, which you can find online and at the link provided here. So enough for me, on to our speakers. We're honored to have Mayor T.J. Gilmore from the city of Lewisville, Texas, joining us to speak. He will be followed by Chris Chastain from Lewisville Parks and Recreation. Then we'll have Victoria Aguilar from the city of Charlotte, North Carolina, and Ben Habenack from the village of Shorewood, Wisconsin. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mayor Gilmore. Thanks so much for joining us today, Mayor.
Appreciate it. Super. And we've got a camera, hopefully. So, well, good afternoon, folks. I appreciate your time and thank you. I'm going to talk to you all about the politics of this and from my perspective. And then, of course, Chris Chastain is going to follow up and make sure to fix any inaccuracies in my commentary, as well as talk to you a little bit about the nuts and bolts of how we implement it in Lewisville. I need to take you back to where I come from in my headspace. I grew up in the Arizona desert, so we didn't have butterflies. We had Arizona bark scorpions. They are a lot more prolific, but definitely I come from a headspace of water, water scarcity, and how do we protect that piece of what we're doing. And of course, I've lived here in North Texas for over 25 years now, and nobody's bringing their water with them as we continue to grow. You know, we're over 8.5 million folks, and we're projected to be 12 plus million over the next 20 years. So, you know, I look at the water issue as kind of my key driver internally. A few years back, we signed off on the Mayor's Monarch Pledge, and I thought that, you know, that's great. It's wonderful. Everybody loves monarchs. What I didn't realize is that that had broader implications than don't hit a monarch butterfly with your car. It really created a lot more opportunities for us as a city. And what I mean by that is when we put together our last 10-year plan from resident input, we found that most of our residents, a super majority, said, we want more green space, we want more parks, we want more amenities, that trails, those types of things. So outdoors was definitely a big piece of what we were trying to get done for our residents. 2020 and COVID didn't slow down. We actually found a huge uptick in our outdoor spaces. And so what we've become over the last few years, you know, as we're trying to create an environment that fosters the monarch based on the Monarch Challenge, what we've really come to for us Texas folks is how do we create a Buc-ee's for butterflies? How do we create a pit stop, if you will, that opportunity for as they migrate for them to be successful? Now, we've got multiple programs that build upon this, but I will tell you that the first couple of years that we started this program, we got a lot of pushback from residents that didn't like the scruffy appearance. For some reason, many of them feel like they're entitled to a golf course, a pristine grass, which Texas has never had. Texas has always been a bit scruffy. And I think being able to lean into that with, you know, those first 3 years is an important piece of the education. What you really have to be careful of is making sure that you don't end up in a situation where the city's doing something that residents can't be doing, because it begins to look as do as I say, not as I do. We constantly get comments like, oh, well, they can make it look a little bit, not as pristine with native plants. But if I did that, my code enforcement officer would be all over me. Well, the reality is we actually have our Roots for Wings program that lets residents do exactly what the city does and see the benefits of that. So we definitely want to be able to have that component whenever you're looking to push this type of project out there, so that when folks complain on social media, they have an avenue for education. We also spend a lot of time with our master naturalists, and our master gardeners, helping us to deploy these types of solutions and provide the education that our residents need. Our Keep Lewisville Beautiful, our Leela outdoor learning area, those folks have also been champions online, because your elected officials can't be the only ones arguing for this online. They have to have your support to be able to drive that type of change. And I will tell you that there's a city right next to us, and I actually got complaints from residents next door about our native plantings and everything that we're doing in the medians. Well, that town's entire identity is based off of native plants. The town is literally called Flower Mound. And so when you have that kind of disconnect, education is a huge piece of the puzzle, to make sure people understand that, hey, for the first couple, 3 years, this may not look as pristine as you think it should. But the opportunities for water reduction, the opportunities for increased native pollinators, the opportunities for just having a better quality of life are huge if you can start these types of programs. So that's kind of my high level from a politics side. But if you have elected officials that grew up on a golf course and you need some help on how to get them to change their mind, I'm more than happy to be a resource. And with that, I think that's my time. So thank you, Patrick, and thank you everyone for taking the time.
Thank you, Mayor Gilmore. We really appreciate that feedback and the offer for help to those that may be experiencing similar situations. So, Chris, feel free to share your presentation and you can take it away.
All right, thank you so much. Let's get our slideshow. And of course, thank you, Mayor Gilmore, for that introduction. I'll try to do it justice by sharing the work we're doing in Lewisville. All right, so as Mayor Gilmore mentioned, there's a lot of different things that we're working on in Lewisville to both meet the commitments of the Mayor's Monarch Pledge, but also just our overall commitment to sustainability. But today, I know we're focusing on roadside habitat, so we wanted to share a project that we'd worked on recently, some of the results and outcomes and what we've taken away from it, so that hopefully everyone on this call today can find some little nuggets that they can implement in their communities as well. So quickly, just for some background, in Lewisville, the plan that Mayor Gerborn mentioned is known as the Lewisville 2025 Vision. And just want to state that one of the big moves identified in that plan is extending the green, which specifically calls on city staff and partners to extend the green centerpiece, the green areas of Lewisville throughout the city so that nature is accessible to everyone. And there are specific action items lined out that relate to pollinators. And so I just want to emphasize that we didn't just, wake up one day and say, hey, how cool would it be if we just start putting wildflowers everywhere? This is something that was requested from resident feedback. We implemented it into our planning. We strategized for it, and then we took action. So it did take a little bit of time to reach this point, but we're very purposeful about it. Other places that you find these initiatives in Lewisville, it is baked into our Healthy Infrastructure Plan, which is our Parks and Recreation Master Plan, as well as we created a master strategy for our green centerpiece, which includes Leela that the mayor mentioned, and it's about 6,000 acres of green space that kind of lies through the center of Lewisville. We want to preserve that space and then extend it and make it accessible for all of our residents. So that's kind of the impetus of why we find this work important and the fact that we show our residents we're committed to it. So the actual project of trying to find opportunities in roadside settings, Our first phase, we knew that we wouldn't be able to tackle this alone, so we created a partnership with our local university, which here in Lewisville is the University of North Texas, and that gave us access to all kinds of data collection opportunities. Students, they have their own environmental research institute, so they came with a depth of knowledge that we could tap into, because our goal was really to approach this from a certain lens of research. We wanted to learn the most effective way to establish these areas so that we could replicate it in time and know that every time we went to establish a new area, we were doing so in the most efficient and successful way possible. And so the resources that went into this project, of course, were plant seeds, equipment that would be needed, materials. From UNT, we were lucky enough to hire 4 summer interns to help with this project, and then hosting outreach events as well as creating signage, interpretive signage that could be placed out in these areas. So the plan was, again, to optimize treatment of these areas and create a list of plants that we carefully selected that we knew would help us meet our goals. We were wanting to convert 19 acres of medians along a specific stretch of road that we have here in Lewisville, which is Garden Ridge. And it's almost like an artery within our city. It connects residents to some of our major highways. It's even a major thoroughfare to accessing DFW Airport. So we know that this is a road that people are traveling up and down, which one was going to visually show this project to lots of cars going by, but then also from that high level of traffic, we knew it was going to have a great impact on the local environment by helping with air quality and other things. So we thought this was an ideal location. As we went through our first year, we wanted to assess the strategies, see what the results were, both financially and ecologically. And then, of course, we were wanting to engage with the community, wanted to inform them about the work we were doing. One, so that we could help build supporters. Two, so we can empower them to implement some of these things at home. And then 3, to find any naysayers and hopefully put them at ease and get them to switch to the light side of the force, as you might say. So this is an overview of Garden Ridge and kind of implementing about how we set up our project. So we identified different medians and used them as test plots. We went through and prepared the areas in different ways. On some of them, we just simply threw out seed, wanted to see how that process would work. In other areas, we first tilled the land and then we seeded. And then we even chose one plot where we attempted to do solarization. And there may be some people who are familiar with what solarization is and maybe not, but just to cover it quickly, it involves using plastic sheeting to cover the area, and you want to do this during the warmer months of the year. And what will happen is the heat from the sun will get trapped underneath that plastic sheeting and kind of bounce back and forth and create a mini greenhouse effect with the land. And it will remove any and all vegetation, any and all pests that may be in that soil, and essentially give you a clean slate upon removal of it, to then go back and follow through with plantings. And so we wanted to see how this process might work and if it would be something that we would want to utilize in future areas. And so you can see kind of the end product of us installing the material. We chose one of the medians and covered half of it with the material and left half of it uncovered so that we could directly compare the results. This was some photos taken during the removal. You can see the impact where there was no material, the grass existed, and where we had material, everything was kind of cleared out, gave us a fresh, clean slate to work with. And so we'll talk about a little bit later in the outcome section about what we learned from that process. But going through our first year of planting, because as we know, when you freshly convert an area to pollinators, as much as it'd be nice to have a nice blanket of colorful flowers, it doesn't always end up that way. We commit ourselves to at least 3 years before we have a good idea of what's going to look like in perpetuity. And so by April, we're seeing buds and things, not too much color, but by the end of the month, we're starting to see our first spots of color. You can see some yellows and light purples and pinks. And as we get into May, we're seeing a lot of color. It's a little bit hard to see in this picture, but towards the front, we have some Indian blanket and some bee balms coming on. So we were happy to see a lot of these wildflowers popping up in year one. It really helped us inform our residents about what we were doing. In June, you start to see the color shift, a little bit less of the yellows and purples, and oh, I'm sorry, yellows and reds, and more of those purples along our medians. About July and August, for those who don't know, in Texas, it gets very hot. A lot of things start to go dormant and dry out, especially if we're not getting rain and water. So starting to lose some color, but there's still a few spots in there. One of our goals was to have color within our wildscapes through the months of March through November. So we're still kind of meeting that goal. And as we start to wrap up the hottest part of our year in September and October, we're still finding some new species pop up, providing a little bit of color. And again, this was only in the first year, so our hopes is that we see more and more coverage as we continue. In November, everything had a chance to go through its cycle, had dropped its seed back into the bed. And so we took this opportunity to go ahead and mow the median. Our plans are to mow once a year. We then follow that mowing cycle with a seeding cycle for the first 3 years until the area is established. But then as we headed into year two, which was last year, this is from May, and so you can see there's lots and lots of coverage now. So it's coming on even stronger in year two, which we were very happy to see. We added some additional signage to designate that this is a no-mow zone, answer some of those questions, give people a little bit of feedback, and then just a wider shot of what walking that trail looked like last year is, again, definitely waves and blankets of color as you walk down that trail now. You can see that we do maintain a buffer strip between the wildflower areas and the trail so that it doesn't encroach on anybody. And, you know, we get all the questions of what about snakes and bees? And so we protect against that. We find the critters don't want to cross that buffer strip. So trying to meet everybody's needs while still achieving our goals. And so we're very much looking forward to May 2025 as we get into year three and are excited to see what those results look like. So some of the things that we learned from this process, the plant structure out there is now 70% native and only 14% invasive. As I mentioned, collecting data and observations was going to be a big part of this project. And so prior to us completing this work, we recorded 33 different plant species throughout these medians. It was pretty monoculture of just Bermuda grass. We seeded 47 different species, as well as 20 mature plants. And when we went back after our seeding and blooms came through, that number jumped from 33 species prior to the project to now we've recorded 142 different plant species out there. So the biodiversity of the area has just skyrocketed. And we've seen that reflected in the wildlife that visits us as well. These are some of the most common examples of wildflowers that we find out there. You'll see at the bottom center, of course, we have to have bluebonnet. It's our state flower here in Texas. And so that was a non-starter if we weren't going to have bluebonnets in our seed mix. But there's some of the other popular ones. These are the recommended plants. And so I know that there's people on the call from all different states and all different regions of the country, but just want to make sure that as you approach these kinds of projects, keep all kinds of things in mind. We had lots of discussions with our public works teams, with our city planning teams, because while we love plants and flowers and would just go throw them all out there, we knew that there was going to be considerations from other departments and leaders in our city. So being on such a major thoroughfare, we made sure to select plants that only had low to mid-range heights. We didn't want to see 6-foot tall sunflowers and other things that might obstruct views, especially on those turnarounds and things. As I mentioned earlier, we wanted to get some good color coverage across as much of the year as possible. So we chose things that would plant or bloom in early spring, things that could bloom in the summer, and things that could bloom into the fall to make sure there was at least some color out in the plots between the months of March and November. We had a mix of annuals and perennials. And then again, we picked things that were native to North Central Texas, but wherever you are, you'll want to pick things that are native to your areas as well. We utilize iNaturalist to track a lot of this, and that worked out really well because then it was a direct way to engage with our citizens and let them participate as well. And so again, prior to the project, looking at all taxa, which included wildlife and plants, we had 56 observations. By the end of the project, we jumped up to 961 observations. And within that, we identified 266 unique taxa or 266 unique species of plants and wildlife. And so what that looks like charted out, you can see there, so incredible growth. It's just awesome to see. I won't spend too much time on that, but feel free to reach out and I can talk about it a little bit more in depth. These are some of the common different insects, birds, and pieces of wildlife that we observe out on the properties. Talking about money, some people love plants and birds, but they want to know, does this make financial sense? So on those medians of Garden Ridge, we were spending $32,000 doing 40 mowing cycles a year on those medians. By converting to pollinators and only going down to one mowing cycle per year, those costs went down to just under $5,000. So total mowing savings of $27,000. So that's accounting for the fuel usage, the labor, the equipment, all those things. And people always want to say, but you spent money to get into it. And so you'll see at the bottom, we spent about $20,000 on seed. So even with the costs we put into the project, we still came out saving the city $7,000 on this one particular project area. And as I mentioned, after 3 years, once we pull the seed out of that equation, those savings are going to go up to $27,000 per year. So very exciting to see. And as we replicate this in other areas, the savings continue to grow. So we're benefiting the environment, but it also makes fiscal sense. And so that's a great way to sell different populations of people in your community on why this is something to pursue. So going back to solarization, I'll say long story short, we did have good results, but what we found is that when compared with the tilling and seeding, there wasn't a great advantage to the results that we saw. And because the practice of solarization is so labor intensive, we're now committed to utilizing it for smaller areas, especially if there's a heavy amount of invasive species. We're kind of scorching the earth makes sense, but we would not pursue it again in such a large project area because it does take a lot of time and it is creating a lot of plastic waste by the time you're done with the project. So if you're considering solarization, from Lewisville's experience, we would say use it in small areas, but not large areas. What's next for us? So Mayor Gilmore mentioned our Roots for Wings program, which goes to that fact of we want to empower people who are inspired by this project to complete this work at home. And for the people who are less than inspired by this project and wonder why the city can stop mowing medians, but I can't stop mowing my front yard. Well, guess what? You can. And so this is a great thing to share with them, to let them know that we do not see ourselves as a higher authority than the residents of our city. So Roots for Wings, you attend a workshop. It's led by some of our local partners and volunteers. You learn about watering cycles, you learn about sun versus shade, plant selection specific to our city, all kinds of things that are going to set you up for success. We go over local nurseries where you can source plants and seeds from. We provide you with all the tools you need to be successful, so then you can go home, start your own native garden. We then send out our volunteers to go over a set of criteria to make sure that you're set up for success. They would certify your garden. You get a nice little yard sign that you see in the picture to the left there. Again, because people are usually proud of these installments. And then also it lets their neighbors know that this is not just something that is overgrowing, that this is something that the city is supportive of. It's a quick way to indicate that. And then of course, it's always a little bit of marketing for the program or for these efforts. To the right, what you're looking at is a demonstration garden that we've set up at our animal shelter. So this gives residents an opportunity. They can now come visit this garden, and it's labeled. It uses plant species that we recommend within the program. And it's a great way to see what does an end result look like at one of our public facing facilities. We're committed to putting interpretive signs in these areas, just quick ways to provide people access to digital resources and information related to these efforts. We hosted a number of outreach events. This is one that actually took place on the medians where we invited people to come out and learn more about them. We also do an annual event called Mariposas, which helps us meet our commitments within the Mayor's Monarch Pledge program. And of course, to the right, you see one of our recent certifications as part of the program. We're happy to be a leader, and we've been involved with this program for a number of years now. And we always advertise that to our residents. We do our annual proclamation and all those things to get people involved. We've mapped out a location of all of our pollinator areas on a interactive map that people can access on our website. So they're welcome to go visit any one of these. And also we provide some information, as you see to the right, so they can learn about our prairies. What is a pollinator prairie? What are the benefits? And so we want to help keep people informed. And where we're looking for the future, so currently throughout Lewisville, we've converted 70 acres of our green spaces into pollinator areas. A large number of that is along our highway corridors, where you'll find 35 acres of converted property. Our roadway medians, which includes the project that we went over in today's presentation, and then 10 acres of wildflower areas at various parks and public areas. Places we're looking at in the future are additional highway corridors and additional medians throughout town, as well as looking at the Roots for Wings program. While today it's only available to residents, we are hoping that as soon as next year, we can offer a similar program to our commercial partners and have business owners go through the program and start to convert some of their beds and landscapes around their businesses into wildflower areas as well. So I think that covers everything we wanted to talk about today. Thank you for your time. My contact information is there on the screen. Otherwise, feel free to reach out in the chat, and I'm happy to connect with anyone following today to talk about this a little bit further.
Thank you, Chris. Really appreciate that presentation, and thank you to the participants who found the React button. It's nice to give feedback to our presenters, so keep that coming. And Victoria, you'll be up next, so if you want to go ahead and share your presentation, you can take it away.
All right, thank you. Give me 1 second. Let me share my screen. All right, how does that look? Am I good?
It looks good. Take it away.
Okay, sweet. So yes, my name is Victoria Aguilar, and I'm with the City of Charlotte's Landscape Management Division. We do install, design, and maintain in various green spaces around the city. And this includes medians, some streetscapes, and some of our city-owned facilities. So I'm going to highlight a few examples of the different types of locations where the city has installed roadside pollinator habitats, and those include our medians and rights-of-ways, some urban conservation easement sites, and adjacent to the roadway at a new demonstration garden at our landscape management facility. So landscape management's very first pollinator gardens were installed in 2017 at the Government Center and Old City Hall. So these are two facilities that are located directly across from each other on 4th Street in Uptown Charlotte. And even though they're small, these gardens are highly visible and they're located in a prominent area. So what we did was we converted some existing annual flower beds into pollinator gardens. Initially, we were concerned that a natural garden aesthetic might not be very well received. So in order to maintain a more formal design style, we selected dwarf and compact pollinator species that were chosen for their relatively well-behaved nature. So some of the species that we planted here include Coreopsis, butterfly weed, liatris, some New England asters, and some little bluestem. On the left here, you can see the view from the street in front of Old City Hall, and on the right is in front of the Government Center. And so these are some more pictures of the same gardens. The plants for this project were donated by the North Carolina Wildlife Federation, and the gardens were installed with the help of volunteers from North Carolina Wildlife Federation and with city staff. As part of this project, we also installed these butterfly highway signs that you see on the left to provide educational information for the public. These pictures show what these gardens look like the summer after the first year of planting. To maintain seasonal color year-round, we decided to leave a few small pockets of annual flowers that we change out twice a year. You can see some begonias in front of the sign in the picture on the left. But in hindsight, I think that including conventional landscape annuals like this in our pollinator garden wasn't the best choice for our area. These types of annuals require a lot more maintenance. They're prone to pests like aphids and root rot, and they can be challenging to maintain with the pesticide-free maintenance program, but it was our first project, so we were learning. And so since then, we've expanded the project to include the landscaped areas along 3rd Street, which is the other road frontage on the other side of the government center, and it covers an entire city block. So this pollinator habitat was installed in phases over a couple of years, and we have buttonbush, beautyberry, yopon holly, oak leaf hydrangea, and a bunch of different perennials like butterfly weed, swamp milkweed, Amsonia, echinacea, catmint, pycnanthemum, and muley grass. We also have some elm trees and nuttall oaks. On the left, you can see a photo of one phase of the installation where we use mostly plugs and small containerized plants. And then in the photo on the right, you can see the same area after it had grown in the following fall. So this project was funded by the facility and was done in conjunction with a building renovation where the existing trees and landscape had to be removed. So we used this opportunity to upgrade to an urban pollinator habitat. And so here's another site. This one is at a busy intersection in town where the city maintains a large section of right-of-way on one of our median maintenance contracts. So this project began in 2018, and it was our first attempt at a pollinator habitat in a city right-of-way area that wasn't associated with the facility we maintain. Due to the site's geography, we thought it would be perfect to try out a more natural meadow style design where we could include taller varieties of pollinator plants. This site sits in an area where there wouldn't be any vehicular or pedestrian site obstruction issues. So this garden features several species of woodies, including Father Aguilar, witch hazel, lindera, beautyberry, itea. And we also planted many of the same native grasses and perennials we've already mentioned, and also some others like common milkweed, monarda, rativida, Heliopsis, iris, ruellia. We planted a species of goldenrod here that is currently trying to take over the garden, so we'll have to do some renovations this year to kind of get that back in check. But this garden was planted by landscape management staff using more than 2,000 plugs and containerized plants that were donated by the North Carolina Wildlife Federation. Another plant that we have in this garden that came in on its own is passion flower. And honestly, we're not too sad about that since we actually saw some Gulf fritillary butterflies out there last year. You can see a picture here where we took of the adult fritillaries in the garden. And then here's a picture in the same garden of their larvae eating the leaves of the passion flower. And so this is the same garden. This was where we kind of ran into our first major issue with our landscape maintenance contractors. The garden was really just getting established the summer following the initial installation, and we had a brand new contractor on site who also maintained the medians in that area. And for some reason, they decided to mow the entire garden down with their lawnmowers, and we basically had to start all over again from scratch. It was pretty devastating. We lost probably about half of the original plants in that mishap, but we actually replanted the areas that didn't come back from being chopped to the ground. You can kind of see it coming back here in this picture. And then basically we just asked the contractors to stay out of the pollinator habitat area and just mow the section of turf around it. So what we do is we get volunteer groups to come out and help us do maintenance periodically. So it's a little bit weedier than we would like, but we have lots and lots of great pollinators in there throughout the year. So here's another example of a median where we have created pollinator habitat. So we have a few medians around town that we have tried this in. Sometimes medians are hard. You know, it's kind of a challenge for installing pollinator habitat because of site distance considerations. So Charlotte's DOT requirements are that plants can't get taller than 30 inches at maturity. Or if they're a tree, they have to have a 6-foot clearance. So for this project, we bought bulbs and containerized plants using some of our median maintenance, our median renovation funds. And so the work was completed by one of our local contractors. Prior to this planting, the median had been filled with just junipers and barberries. And so we pulled all of that out. We left the crepe myrtle, and then we added a mix of pollinator-friendly perennials, including iris, baptisia, amsonia, butterfly weed, liatris, phlox, and several others. And so here's another example of a roadside area where we added pollinator habitat. This is on one of our TCPP properties, which stands for Tree Canopy Preservation Program. And these are areas that the city sets aside land for conservation easements. So this garden is located on a huge abandoned right-of-way on the corner of an intersection near Uptown Charlotte. And you can see the before picture on the left and then the design concept on the right. This garden was designed in partnership with the community members, and it features pathways that mimic the old streetscape in the historic Third Ward neighborhood of Charlotte, which is where it's located at. So this garden has a more formal design. It even has a culinary section featuring herbs and fruit trees. This garden was planted by contractors and landscape management staff. And I believe for this garden, the plants were also donated by the North Carolina Wildlife Federation. So again, it has many of the same species we've already talked about, but we also have some fringe trees here, some gaillardia, and some rattlesnake master. This garden features a border of fescue turf that gives it a bit of a more manicured look, which can sometimes be more palatable to the public, especially when they're used to seeing more formally landscaped areas like in Charlotte. Conventional landscaping is the norm, very highly irrigated, highly pruned, fertilized, lots of green striped turf and little meatball shaped hollies everywhere. But we're hoping that with programs like these, we can help to shift that paradigm a little bit so that people understand and appreciate a more natural approach to landscaping with wildlife in mind. One of our biggest projects underway, one that's ongoing that we're really excited about, is our Tuckasegee Arboretum and Gardens project. In May of 2023, Tuckasegee Arboretum and Gardens, which is located on the grounds of our landscape management facility, became an accredited ArbNet Level 1 Arboretum. And then the garden part of this project is going to be a large demonstration pollinator habitat. It will cover about half an acre and will include many different pollinator habitat elements, such as a meadow, an edible garden, a shade habitat, among others. The demonstration garden will allow us to test out different garden preparation methods, design elements, and maintenance tactics so that over time we can learn more about creating and maintaining pollinator habitats and then be able to share that knowledge with the public. So here's an aerial view of the entire Arboretum and garden area. And here's another aerial view of the pollinator garden. And this was our very first phase of planting we did, which was our roadside habitat area. We did this with plugs and containerized plants, again, donated by North Carolina Wildlife Federation and planted by volunteers from the North Carolina Wildlife Federation and with landscape management staff. This picture shows our roadside habitat area last year during an event where we had some volunteers who came out and helped with some of the weeding, and we put out plant labels and did some supplemental planting there. Here you can see a solarization project we did to test out that method of soil prep, which Chris was talking about earlier. And then last year we brought in a bunch of mulch. So we brought in about 300 yards of our arborist wood chips from our pile out back. And we did this to kill out the grass in the areas that we will be planting pollinator habitat in the future. So we have a couple of different ways that we've tried to do soil prep, and we can share that with people when they come out and do tours of the garden. These photos were taken just this past year at Tuckasegee Arboretum and Gardens. So we saw this adult monarch visiting in May, and then her caterpillars were seen on the butterfly weed a week or so later. And then this fall, we found more monarch caterpillars eating the butterfly weed leaves in a different section of the garden. So we found these guys in like early October, and then they were gone within a few days, hopefully on their way to overwinter in Mexico. So if you build it, they will come. So that's it. I thank you guys very much. And I left my email address here in case you all wanted to reach out to me with any questions. Thanks.
Thank you so much for that presentation. That was really wonderful. Excited to see all the different projects in Charlotte. Roadside habitat can look so different in every community. So thank you for that. And let's see, we're going to go with Ben Habeneck now. You can go ahead and share your presentation, Ben. Looks good. Ben, if you're speaking, you're still on mute.
All right. Yeah. Thank you. Do I need to swap, or am I good the way I'm here?
You're good. You're good the way you are. Thank you.
Okay, great. I'm Ben Habanek. I'm the services foreman for the Village of Shorewood, Department of Public Works. Shorewood is a small village, kind of butts right up to the north side of the city of Milwaukee, and we're right on Lake Michigan. The village itself, I think, compared to the last two presenters, we're quite tiny. We're less than 2 square miles, and heavily built out. Roughly 74% residential, and the remainder is mostly some small areas of commercial development. You can see from this picture here.
Ben, I'm sorry to interrupt. It appears that some folks are having trouble seeing your screen. I'm going to recommend that you stop your share and reshare, just so that folks can see all the nice graphics and photos.
Is this helping?
It looks like
it looks good. I'm seeing some thumbs up. So take it away. Thank you.
Great. Shorewood statistically is the most densely populated community in the state of Wisconsin. So we have very little in the way of extra space to be inserting these types of projects. And most of this development was from the early part of the 20th century. This picture here is a typical street in Shorewood, which is pavement, a small strip of turf grass, more pavement, and then more turf grass, and then a house. There is not a whole lot of extra room for habitat development of any kind, really. The green space within the village is roughly 12% by area. The village itself operates about 14 acres, and that does not include properties owned by the school district. And then in the upper left portion of this map is a park that's owned by the Milwaukee County, and that it's a pretty nice area there, but the village is not in control of that. We do have several small, very, very heavily used parks, and the area within those parks is heavily contested for different user groups. And so we don't exactly have a whole lot of extra space for insect habitat. The one thing we do have is a pretty positive attitude towards ecological landscaping techniques. Most people are pretty tolerant of a more loose, a more natural type of look. For our DPW operations, we really don't use anything in the way of pesticides. We do use some insecticides to work against emerald ash borer, which is a major problem here, and then some pesticide usage in stewardship areas and some of our natural areas for invasive species control. The village has, for about the past 15 years, used a natural lawn care program, which is 0 pesticides, and then all of the supplements, fertilizers on that are natural and organic. It's we do have dandelions, but we also have lots of clover. And I often try to remind people that there's no point in planting natives and pollinator habitats if you're just going to douse your lawn in chemicals to keep your lawn looking good. So I'm fortunate here to manage a natural lawn care program where that's safe for children and pets 365 days a year. As far as our landscaping is concerned, we have a lot of landscaped areas from the 90s and early 2000s that are sort of aging out of their usability. And so from time to time, redesign an area and encouraged to use native plants wherever possible. The big thing I'll say for us is that in the state of Wisconsin, we do have a lot of rainfall. And so stormwater management is a big ticket item here, and we are required by the state of Wisconsin to put green infrastructure features in all of our capital projects. And so these are things like bioswales and biofilters are really, really great opportunities for us to get native plants into the landscape, wherever we can, because they serve stormwater functions. It also allows us to roll those into capital projects, and that covers a lot of the costs for us, and so we don't have to pull them out of operational expenses. The first project that came about was in roughly 2010, and this is probably the first time that biofiltration was used widely in the village. Capitol Drive is one of the main corridors in Shorewood, very heavily developed, lots and lots of traffic, and lots of pedestrian traffic, which is an issue. As I mentioned, we do have there's 11 biofilters along there, and they catch water from storm drains, and the water goes into these biofilters, and it's filtered through a special soil mix. It pulls the suspended solids and pollutants and trash out of the water before it can enter the sewage system. In some cases, some of the water goes into the sewer or the storm sewer, and some of it actually infiltrates down into the soil, back into the aquifer. But they are really great opportunities to use native plants in the landscape, because native plants are uniquely tolerant of the harsh conditions. So we're talking about extreme drought here, and then all of a sudden, in the course of about 2 hours, you've got 6 inches of standing water in there. And so it's a really good opportunity to use native plants in a heavily urban environment, and then that in turn is beneficial for insects as well. In addition to the biofilters, there's a whole bunch of these little concrete boxes that were placed on the pedestrian bump outs. And when I started working here in 2018, a lot of these simply had no plants left in them. The planting designs that were placed, the conventional planting designs that were put in 2010 slowly died out and were not being replaced. They were, however, being irrigated, which was interesting. So little by little, I've been purchasing plug-sized native plants for this area, and we stick them in these beds. It's turned out really well. Every year or two, I bring in a whole bunch more plugs and we fill the open spaces. I don't worry too much about stuff getting tall or flopping over, because we just cut it off. And overall, the results have been really positive for us, without a whole lot of effort, without a whole lot of financial input, using existing space that we already had. Another project that used green infrastructure to a great degree is our 2018 construction of Wilson Drive. Wilson Drive is kind of on the western border of Shorewood, and it does border that big Estabrook Park. There's a large park, and so if you can see from this picture here, to the right, we've got a bike path corridor that's kind of forested, and to the left, we've got Wilson Drive itself. And in between, there's 5 or 6 of these big bioswales, and these catch stormwater from Wilson Drive. They do fill up with water quite nicely. If we get a heavy rain, it's really interesting to watch these fill up with water. And then when the rain stops, the water level slowly goes down. And the solution for this was to use native vegetative mat from Agricol. And it's basically what I would call prairie sod. So in this case, shortgrass prairie was the seed mix that was used, and you can see the plant list here. This is custom seeded stuff, and then it's rolled into place, and you know, kind of treat it like sod, except we don't mow it. It takes several years for the full spectrum of plants to express themselves. And so I remember talking to my director a year after this went in. She said, "Why isn't this more colorful?" And so a lot of these plants take 3, 4, 5 years to bloom from seed. And with each passing year since the project, we've seen more and more color, more and more diversity in these spaces. You'll notice here, because the seed is uniformly mixed throughout the mat, the different plants sort of take up the spaces where they're most happy. So in this case, a lot of the grasses and shorter stuff and sedges are happier on the left, closer to the road, whereas on the right, we've got a lot of the taller things like coneflowers and pycnanthemums and things like that seem to be doing better further away from the road. Maybe it's a road salt issue. But the plants sort of organize themselves to be happy wherever they need to be. And this has worked out really well for us so far. Going forward, we will be supplementing this with occasional seeding and then plug plantings whenever it's available, because we're gonna have to kind of maintain that diversity and supplement what's there going forward. Maintenance wise, we're just in there controlling invasives and trying to make sure we don't get any really noxious weeds in there. But aside from that, it's not a whole lot of work for us, which is nice. Within this project also, we have a couple of centerline bioswales, and I think that these were added later in the design of the project because they noticed a drainage issue. Because of the way the ground is sloped here, there was not room for bioswale to be placed on the outside of the road. So they made these ones down the middle. And I'll say that they do catch a lot of water. It's really interesting to watch them fill up. They are very difficult to maintain. We contract out the maintenance of these beds, and they have a really difficult time getting in there and getting weeds and trash out because of the way the traffic is here. They do catch a lot of garbage. They do catch a lot of rainwater. They pull a lot of pollutants out of the water, and they catch drunk drivers as well, which is really interesting. Beyond that, like I said, we've got a lot of maturing landscapes around the village. And so every time a landscape overstays its welcome, rip it out and reinstall with native plants. It's on a fairly small scale, and it's as staff and budget allows, but we've been able to kind of redo some areas and really create some nice native plant vignettes and expose the public. In general, the response has been really positive. This is an interesting area by our village center. We have a bunch of these raised planting beds, just big concrete boxes that happen to be irrigated. Little by little, I'm just jamming native plants in there every year, and pretty soon it got filled up. So it's a really nice place. The public seems to really enjoy sitting there reading books. And our butterfly garden was another interesting thing. It's been there for a long time. It was an extremely wet area of the landscape that was originally planted as a formal rose garden. And if anybody who's dealt with roses know that they don't really like humidity, excess moisture. So this has been gradually turned into a big butterfly garden. The challenge here is that certain plants are very thuggy, and we've got Joe Pieweed in here that's really a bear to dig out of the ground. It does attract a lot of monarchs, and recently somebody put cup plant in there as well, and it's been a challenge to try and control that to kind of encourage the diversity that we're looking for. And that concludes my presentation. Anybody can feel free to reach out if they want to. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ben. That was a wonderful presentation. We are right at the top of the hour, which means we're unfortunately out of time for our Q&A session. I think all of us presenters took 2 or 3 extra minutes and we squeezed that out. I know a number of questions were asked in the chat that we did our best to answer as we went through. For the other questions, please know that we'll do our best to respond to those questions by email. You can also email us directly at mayorsmonarchpledge@nwf.org, and we can respond to you that way. I do want to say a big thank you to our speakers. I really enjoyed all the different presentations that we saw today. I want to thank the Community Habitat team, Emily and Samantha, who are on with us here that helped to make this webinar possible. And want to thank all of you for joining us. So with that, we're going to conclude the webinar. Thank you so much for joining us today, and thanks for all you're doing for wildlife and monarchs and your community. Take care.